Welcome to this special podcast for the Curtin University Executive Education Program. In this podcast, I'm going to look at bush survival techniques and how they can be applied in this time of COVID-19, particularly how they can be applied in terms of our own strategic planning for our family, for ourselves, and also for business. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through some slides in a moment. My apologies. This is the very first time I've actually had a go at working Zoom, so this is going to be very, very rough and ready. For those of you that haven't met me before, I actually teach in the MBA program. I teach strategy, but my day job actually is as a company director and also as an ideas consultant. I also have a couple of hobbies. I'm currently, or if you call it a hobby, I currently preparing a PhD on creative thinking. I also, some of you will know, have been a former cyclist, not so much now, but I have in the past, and held a number of world records. But possibly something that a few people do know about me is that I have a very strong interest in bush survival and have undertaken a number of walks and the like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through how we survive in the bush and some of the lessons from that in terms of strategic planning in times of stress. So let me go over to a couple of slides if I can, and I'll work you through some of the teachings that occur in bush survival and the lessons we can get from that. So hopefully now you're seeing a slide, and this is actually a photo of myself crossing the Pentecost River a few years ago now, and I very much like going out in the bush with very little gear and seeing how I can survive. This photo was actually taken by a tourist who noticed me crossing the river and then took the photo and sent it to me as a reminder that I just crossed the river with a saltwater crocodile just lurking nearby. So, yeah, an interesting situation. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to look at bush survival in a couple of contexts. One is how bush survival instructors teach people to manage stress and isolation, how plans are developed in a bush survival situation, how plans are communicated in bush survival, and finally, leadership. I mentioned about my own bush survival experience. Look, I'm nowhere near an expert. I've undertaken a few interesting trips. If you see the top of the map, a couple of times now I've walked from Derby to Kununurra, and the top photo is of one of those walks. Actually, the bottom photo is also another walk where I had a very small cart that I took with me, and I pretty much stuck to the Gibb River Road. The bottom line that you'll see going out from east of Kalgoorlie, myself and a friend of mine, Neil Dowling, walked pretty much following the Transcontinental Railway line from Rawlinna to Cook. I can't remember how far that was, but it was about a 3-week walk and quite a difficult challenge because there's very, very difficult to find water or food out there. And then the small circle that I'm now showing you, hopefully with the cursor, you're seeing that. I've done a number of limited sort of multi-day survival exercises where I've gone out there with just pretty much a knife and a water bottle and seen how I can live off the land. But as I say, I'm nowhere near a survival expert. If you are interested in bush survival, this is my go-to man, Bob Cooper. He runs survival schools, and if you get to the end of this video and you're interested in the whole concept of bush survival, I'm sure Bob and I can organise some adventures or some training for you and your friends. So let's look at, first of all, a key plank inside bush survival, and it's called the rule of threes. And it's basically set up to help us prioritise our actions in a survival situation in the bush. And broadly speaking, what the rule of three says is that you can survive 3 weeks without food, 3 days without water, 3 hours without shelter, 3 minutes without air, and 3 seconds without the will to live. Now, there's a couple of interesting aspects to this concept. First of all, the timings are not accurate. you can certainly survive more than 3 weeks without food. I actually did an exercise many years ago just to test this, and I went 17 days without food. And the only reason I stopped is because I just got too damn hungry. But you could definitely go more than 3 weeks without food. But what's really interesting here is the last one, the whole concept of 3 seconds without the will to live. And basically, bush survival is all about once you give up, then things really go south quickly. And it's so important not to give up and to maintain a positive mindset in what can sometimes be very difficult circumstances. So a lot of bush survival is about teaching the management of anxiety and fear. And I thought that this would be an interesting subject for us as we work our way through COVID-19, because irrespective of how tough some of us might think we are, we're all going to feel a level of anxiety and fear. And it's very interesting how these emotions are taught to be handled in bush survival. The couple of the techniques is the first is just to stop. Like when you're in a survival situation, just stop and just relax and clear your head and take it easy. And again, the same applies for COVID-19. Rushing into decisions is just not the right way to do it, whether it's to do with your family, yourself, or in particular your business. The second thing is planning. Planning is absolutely critical in survival situations. Very much the theme is that failure to prepare to plan is planning to prepare to fail. And a lot of bush survival is about actually learning techniques and ways of doing things and preparing shelter, finding water and food long before you actually need those things. And the same applies to us in COVID-19. Businesses should be spending a lot of time at the moment on scenario planning and actually learning what they will need to do if certain circumstances arise. And if you're interested in scenario planning, let the executive education team know, and I'm more than happy to put up a slide or a few slides and explain how scenario planning is carried out. The other key thing is not complaining, and it's absolutely critical that you get in your head that complaining absolutely achieves nothing. And Bob Cooper certainly rams this down the throats of those people that he's involved in teaching bush survival. Also, just remember you're not Robinson Crusoe. It doesn't matter how dire you think your situation is that you're in. There's always somebody who's been in a far worse position than you. The other one's humour. It's funny with survival situations, but often it's humour that carries you through the situation at the time, but it's also the concept of humour that allows you to think through the situation. And I know a couple of times when I've run into trouble myself, I've been lost or without having difficulty finding water or whatever, or even facing off against crocodiles or snakes. I've often thought to myself at that moment, if I survive this, it's going to make a really, really humorous anecdote. And for those of you that met me, you'll probably know that to be a fact, because many of my stories are all around my idiocy in getting caught in certain situations and how I got out of them. And the other thing is that often survival situations are an opportunity to learn. And certainly with myself, having run out of water in the bush and having to track animals, listen to birds, watch the behaviour of the environment around, or observing the environment around me, those have been moments where I've learnt the most about finding water than I would have ever learned out of a textbook. And certainly there's a lot to be gained from beginning in a survival situation and what we can learn. And just recently, I've been looking at some of the research on what happens as we come out the end of a survival situation, such as the GFC, and sorry, these are not necessarily life-threatening, but they're severe situations at the time, but GFC or the Great Depression or whatever, and the opportunity it's created for people that have done the right planning and thinking. One of the key things in bush survival is the concept of boredom and isolation. And a lot of people have lost their lives because they haven't been able to control the fear and the emotions that come through boredom and isolation. And one of the key things that anybody who's involved in bush survival tries to reinforce is if you are out in the bush and, for example, your vehicle breaks down, it's really critical to give priority to staying with your vehicle unless the chances of finding water, food or rescue are very, very high if you take an alternative action. But you need to stay with your vehicle. And often people have difficulty staying with their vehicle because they suffer from either boredom or the sense of isolation. So in survival, there's a lot that's taught around managing boredom and isolation. It's going to be a challenge for us, for those of us in self-isolation through COVID. And so I thought it'd be interesting to have a look at how bush survival teaches us to handle those emotions. I guess the first one is the big picture. You must keep in mind the big picture. People that have come through survival situations have often talked about the power of reminding themselves that they had a family at home or friends, or what their life meant in the bigger scheme of things. And certainly as you go through self-isolation with COVID-19, it's important to remember the bigger picture. If we don't self-isolate, the risks to the health system and to other people's lives are enormous. And there's some excellent research that was published in 2018, well before COVID-19 was even thought of, that shows just the impact of not self-isolating has on the well-being of others. And that was a study that was done in the UK that I'm particularly thinking of. The other thing is trying to create a sense of normality and a routine. And people who have gone through survival situations talk about setting themselves up a routine that's as much reflects their home routine as possible. And when I say their home routine, their normal routine. And certainly in survival, what you try and do during the day is run through a routine that looks like the routine that you would have had at home. You get up in the morning, you do whatever you can to clean your teeth, you wash yourself if you can. Even when I went 17 days without food, I used to set up meal times, and I would boil a can of hot water, and drink that as my meal. And it set up this pattern of normality, of having normal meals. And particularly for young children, if you've got them in self-isolation, I've got children in isolation myself at the moment, creating a routine really gives them a sense of assurance that everything's fine. It's really important if you're in a group to give everybody responsibility and a task. And some of the great survival stories of past eras have all talked about giving each member of the group a responsibility and a task that relates to the survival of the whole group. So there might be a person that's assigned to collect firewood. There might be a person that's assigned to maintain the fire. There might be a person who's assigned to maintain the humour of the group, to find entertainment for the group. There'd be a person assigned to assume the overall leadership of the group. Having people given responsibility and tasks is really critical. And again, with COVID-19, when you're in a isolation environment, particularly in a family group, giving each person a responsibility and a task is critical. The other is finding opportunity out of diversity. And I know myself, at one stage I was in the Kimberley, and I stupidly got myself in a situation where I was struggling to find water, and I noticed that I also had the opportunity during that period to observe things that I probably would have walked past. And I actually one morning observed two dingoes hunting down a kangaroo, and it was absolutely fascinating what I learnt about how wild animals work in the wild in terms of hunting, and that's a story for another day. The other thing is have short-term goals. Just just achieving little milestones each day or each half day or whatever, absolutely critical. And again, I come back to humour. The whole concept of seeing humour in a situation really, really helps. And the final thing is improvising. If you spend time improvising, it's amazing what you can actually achieve and set up. And having said all those things, one of the things I'd really suggest to you is have a look at this video if you haven't already seen it. It's called The Martian, and make a note of some of the things that I've just talked about, and watch how in the film The Martian, Matt Damon actually employs all of these techniques, and it's a great way to remember just the power of these techniques. My family have just been I've been in isolation now for 2 weeks. We've been planning isolation probably for 5 weeks now, and I've grown potatoes in the backyard, and you'll see the humour in that if you actually watch the film The Martian. The other thing that you might think about if you're looking for films or books to read is see if you can get hold of this book. It's a really, really cheap book to buy. It's called Who Moved My Cheese? It takes about an hour to read, and it's basically a fable of two mice who each day go out hunting for cheese, and then one day they turn up and the cheese that was always there and has always been plentiful suddenly is not there, and then how they react to that situation and the learnings that each of the mice have. It's very, very inspirational and very thought-provoking as we go through this time of COVID-19, but also as we go through any time where suddenly the world around us changes unexpectedly, and how we might think of reacting in those circumstances. Anyway, have a look at it. $20 and hopefully online you'll be able to get it. I talked about planning and the importance of planning in survival, and I want to now move on to how plans are put together in a survival situation. But before I do that, I just want to stress that it's just critical to have a plan. Not having a plan is just not an option. And this includes having a plan for yourself and your family, but also in business. If it might feel at the moment, and I've certainly had this discussion with people over the last week or two, as if it's just hopeless even trying to think about a plan because so many things are moving that are outside your control. But unless you have a plan, you're basically leaving everything to being outside your control. And more importantly, you're actually leaving the future as being outside your control. So planning is critical. Planning also achieves another thing, and that is it gives us some sense of control, which then in turn gives us some sense of sort of calmness about how we're going about our lives. So let's have a look at how we plan in a bush environment, a bush survival situation. So the acronym that's sometimes used is the acronym called STOP, and it's easy to remember and it's unbelievably powerful. And in a moment, I'll tell you how I've used it. But basically what STOP means is that the first thing you do in a survival situation is you stop. You stop what you're doing, you clear your head, you make a cup of tea, you basically don't focus on the problem you've got, you just focus on clearing your head. The next thing is you start thinking. And you just think clearly through the situation, its ramifications and requirements. Often what happens in a survival situation when people run into trouble, it's because they're not thinking clearly about the situation. There was a story a few years ago, for example, of a lady that nearly died of dehydration in the desert. And eventually some people found her, and she had her feet in a dam of water. And they said to her, "Why weren't you drinking the water?" And she said, "Oh, because I thought it would be polluted and it was going to kill me." Not drinking the water was going to kill her. She actually hadn't just thought through the situation. And often you get these situations in survival where people just haven't thought through the problem. So the first thing to do is just think about what's going on around you, what's the ramification, what's the connection between all the different factors. Then the next thing that's absolutely critical is observing. what you've now got to do is stand back and observe your surroundings. And because often what you observe actually creates a solution to the problem you've got. Certainly, when you're out of water in a survival situation, observation just turns a survival situation into I was out of water for a couple of minutes type scenario. Because by observing, you quickly pick up, particularly if you've had some training, the signals that show where the water is. And I know once I ran out of water, within a couple of 100 metres, I came across a path that had been clearly made regularly by kangaroos. And effectively, it was just a highway to water. Like, why would 100 kangaroos always walk down this same path? And sure enough, by following that path for a K or so, I came across a pond of water, problem averted. Another time, ran out of water, and it was towards the end of the day, and it was just a question of stopping and observing and listening. And certain enough, I heard little birds chirping away. And what little grain-eating birds do, every night they go and find water. Sometimes it's the tiniest piece of water or puddle of water, or might be a piece of water, a little bit of water in a tree. But by observing, you find your solution. And it's after doing those first three things that you then plan. You put a considered plan together. So they are the four steps that we use in bush survival, and they're the four steps that are really ideal for using in any situation that involves high levels of stress, anxiety, or sudden change. One of the difficulties in coming up with a plan, however, is that you can sometimes come up with a couple of really, really good plans, and then the problem is selecting the plan. The US Marines are very big on the fact that indecision is what causes problems. Deciding on a plan and it not necessarily being the best plan is far better than not deciding on any plan at all. And so in the US Marines and elsewhere, they often teach this system called the rule of three decision making. I just want to run through that with you because it may help you when you're now faced with, okay, I've come up with a couple of plans and I want to decide which one it is. And it's a very, very simple process. Basically what you do is you identify three different solutions. The recommendation is three, perhaps four at the outside. Don't overcomplicate this. Just pick what you think your three best are. Then you just sit down and you just map out the positives and negatives for each option. You don't overdwell on this. You just map them out. In the Australian Army, this technique is the basis of what's called appreciations. But you just map out the positives and negatives. So now on a piece of paper or in your head, you've now got three scenarios or three particular plans, and you've now mapped out the positives and negatives for each plan. You haven't overanalyzed it, just first thoughts. Then you pick one, and then you stick with it. And that's basically the way of narrowing down your plan to a selected plan. And the final dot point's really, really critical. Once you've got it, then you absolutely run with it. Now, this doesn't mean that you don't have future flexibility as new information becomes available, but until new information becomes available, you stick with that plan. So your plan may have been, okay, I've seen a track that obviously hundreds of kangaroos have been making over many weeks. I'm going to follow this track now because the chances are it will lead to water. There's techniques you use to know which direction to go in, which are all to do with the paths converging. You follow that. And then as you're going along, you may suddenly see a group of trees like palm type trees, particularly in the Kimberley, which are an absolute dead cert sign of water. So you now are open to changing your plan because new and very valuable information has been introduced that actually you can use as a better plan for getting water. Then I'm going to come to communicating a plan. You've developed a plan, And in bush survival, a lot of the techniques that are used do come from the military, because a lot of military people also have an interest in bush survival. And what happens is that we often see military-style techniques come over into the bush survival world. And one of those is the concept of SMEAC. And basically, SMEAC is an approach used to communicate a plan to others. And effectively what it does is this, and it's very, very simple. The first thing you communicate is the situation. You tell the people that you're communicating a plan to what's going on around them. Obviously, in a military situation, to be to do with the topography and location of friendly forces, enemy forces, and the like. But in a civilian environment or a survival situation, say a plane crash, you'd be explaining to the group what you understood the current situation was, number of people dead, alive, where you're possibly located, where rescue was possibly located. So basically the situation around you. Then you would have a mission. And this basically is a very, very clear and concise few words that state what you're intending to, or what you want to see achieved. Then there's execution. And this is all the detail around what you expect of individuals, how you want them to carry out their tasks. And this is all to do with actually feeding into the achievement of the mission. Then there's administration and logistics, and this is to do with how things are going to happen around supplying people with food or water, all the sort of administrative type things that go around running a survival situation or running a plan for your business. And then finally, there's command and signals. And this is to do with how people are going to be reporting back to you, when they're going to be reporting back to you, how they're going to be reporting back to you, how you're going to stay in communications with each other. I did miss one item in there, and that is, as I went through those, is that, and also an important part of this is that there's an actions-on element in this as well, where under the execution you may also say, look, okay, if something happens, then this is the alternate plan I want you to follow. So it's an actions-on. I try not to have too much of this or make it too complicated, because you want people to remember the primary simple task. And then finally, I want to finish off with leadership. And leadership is really interesting. Obviously, in a military situation, a lot is taught in the area of leadership. There's a lot of models for leadership. But I actually want to focus on leadership in a sort of civilian crisis, be it bush survival or actually just managing your own business. And to do this, rather than use the bush survival concepts of leadership, which are very similar to the ones I'm just about to show you, I actually want to show you some research that's been done by academics in the area of leadership coming out of a business crisis. And these are the key points. The first is you need to be making the right promises. The second point is you need to be gathering multiple viewpoints. You're not the font of all knowledge. There's a lot of information that you need to be gathering, and a lot of people around you are going to have valuable information that you need to be open to. You need to develop or find people with core skills that are going to be needed in that situation. So there's an aspect of, if you can't find them, you need to teach them those skills and then give them that responsibility. You need to develop you need to deliver results through relationships. The relationship you have with your team or those around you is absolutely critical now in actually leading somebody through a survival situation. If your relationship's been poor in the past, you're going to have trouble leading. And the other thing is use authentic communication. Just be open and honest with people. And once they know you're open and honest and they can trust you, lots of other things are going to happen. Now, I'm putting this up because, first of all, not only is it critical to living through a survival situation and leading your team or your group or even your family through that survival situation. But it's going to be a very interesting observation as we move through COVID-19 and see how our political and other leaders manage these elements of the criticality inside leadership. And as you see them now on the screen and you reflect on certainly our political leaders and some of the weaknesses some of them have had, even just immediately prior to COVID-19, in delivering this style of leadership, you'll see the challenges that they've got in having to re-establish their presence in order to lead people. And if problems eventuate in the future, I think you'll find that they will be to do with a breakdown on one of these aspects of leadership. So look, some final thoughts. Crises don't last forever. There is no record of a crisis, be it a world war or a famine or whatever, lasting forever. We eventually will come out of it. The other thing is that crises by their very nature have high levels of uncertainty. You can be in the bush and be running without water, and then a moment later you come across water purely by chance or as part of your strategic plan, and the whole game changes on you. Or somebody drives over the hill and suddenly, wow, you're rescued. The same occurs in crisis, even like COVID-19. You've got to appreciate and take into your mind the fact that the crisis will have unexpected downturns, things that you weren't expecting that make it a lot worse for you and others, but also there'll be unexpected upturns where you weren't expecting a very favourable change. And it could well be that as I'm preparing this presentation to you, where within hours, or it might even be happening right this very minute, that somebody announces they have a vaccine for COVID-19. That suddenly becomes an absolute game changer, and all our planning that we've done over the last few weeks suddenly needs to change. So expect the unexpected, and expect the unexpected to also be not only negative but also positive. And then finally, and I absolutely stress this, is opportunity exists within adversity. I've spent many years reading about people and how they've survived through periods of adversity. I've done it as part of my own understanding of bush survival. And one of the things that I've learned out of that reading is that people find opportunity in adversity. For those of you in my strategy class, you'll know of me talking about the Aldi stores and how the Aldi brothers developed the concept of the Aldi stores as they sat effectively rotting in a prisoner of war camp. And a lot of the concepts inside Aldi that are currently used actually were developed inside that prisoner of war camp. Those brothers having I was going to call it the opportunity, but having the adverse situation arise where they were in a prisoner of war camp created an enormous opportunity for a lot of other people later on, including themselves. So see opportunity within adversity, and part of your scenario planning over the coming weeks should be, how can this adversity actually create opportunity for me? So look, that's it from me. Hopefully you found this of use. I've put this together for the Curtin University's Executive Education Unit. If there's things that have arisen during this presentation that you'd like to hear more of, certainly contact Executive Education, and I'd be more than happy to explore some further topics for you. So with that, I'll struggle to get back to my own screen. Hopefully that's all worked for you, and good luck and enjoy your time in self-isolation. I'm just around the corner, so if you want to give me a call or an email, and let's get through this together, and let's find opportunity at the other side. See you later.